Le agradezco.
I thank Ms. Deems of ICANN for her contribution, and I now give the floor to Mr. Akira Kawasaki of Peacehold.
Madam President, distinguished delegates, I'm speaking for the Japan Network for Nuclear Weapons Abolition. The network works to raise public awareness, promote dialogue between the government and civil society, and collaborate with various international initiatives, including ICANN. Against the will of the hibakusha and many Japanese citizens, Japan still maintains a security policy which is dependent upon nuclear weapons. The government of Japan was one of the few states dependent on nuclear weapons to send a delegation to speak at this conference. However, in its remarks, the government of Japan claimed that the legal prohibition on nuclear weapons cannot be effective without the participation of nuclear weapon states, and that it will deepen the divide between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. It thus concluded that it cannot participate in the negotiation of a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, which is the very mandate of this conference. This is a serious neglect of its responsibility. It is wrong to assert that this treaty has no effect just because many nuclear weapon states and nuclear-dependent states are not immediately participating. Rather, it is important to create mechanisms which will enable these states to join the treaty, if not now, in the future. This is an important challenge for the institutional arrangement of this treaty. Consideration is required regarding the form in which nuclear weapon states and nuclear-dependent states could potentially join this treaty and clarification of these conditions. Once the treaty is concluded, efforts must be made to expand the signatory states and have it come into effect as early as possible. It is more important to engage the nuclear weapon states and nuclear-dependent states in this process, and we must work now to construct mechanisms for this purpose. Civil society is prepared to contribute to this process as it has until now. Increasing awareness of the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons is sure to contribute to the expansion of signatory states and achieving the universality of this treaty. Madam President, the group of nuclear-dependent states, including Japan, proposes a progressive approach through building blocks. Certainly, each of these practical measures related to nuclear disarmament and verification, so-called building blocks, is important. In a treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons, many of these measures could be incorporated, for example, in the forms of protocols, into the program for implementation. The claim that the development of a treaty prohibiting nuclear weapons must wait until the stage of final block lacks reasonable ground. If those states dependent on nuclear weapons are truly committed to a world free of nuclear weapons, they must not boycott the negotiation, but rather they must participate. They should utilize the nuclear disarmament measures they themselves have taken in the development of the Nuclear Weapons Prohibition Treaty, leading towards the total elimination. From this perspective, we call upon all states not participating in the March session to join the June-July session and fulfill their responsibilities. Lastly, let me reiterate that the treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons must reflect the call of no more hibakusha in express terms, acknowledging the suffering of all survivors as well as their efforts and dedication, and calling for further research and education regarding the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. I thank you very much.
Le agradezco mucho.
I'm very grateful to Mr. Kawasaki of Peacehold for his contribution, and I now give the floor to Ms. Setsuko Arai of Peace Depot.
Thank you, Madam President. Considering the devastating and inhuman nature of nuclear weapon detonation, as is proven through the experiences shared at this conference by Mr. Fujimori, Ms. Thurlow, and Ms. Coleman Hazeldine. Peace Depot, a Japan-based NGO, fully supports an early conclusion of a legal instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. As delegates and civil society colleagues have stated repeatedly, now is the time to take a step forward, and we should not lose momentum. At the same time, Peace Depot believes it important to try to involve as many states as possible, in particular the nuclear-armed states and their allies, in the process and outcome of the negotiations. This is due to the undeniable fact that the achievement of our goal to abolish nuclear weapons would not be possible without the involvement of nuclear-armed states in the end. Madam President, it may seem that an early delegitimization of nuclear weapons and the involvement of states that are currently reluctant to or opposing prohibition are incompatible with each other. In our view, they are not, and it would be worth the effort to seek institutional arrangements addressing them simultaneously. From that perspective, we propose as a possible option to negotiate the legal instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons as part of a larger framework on nuclear disarmament. Our proposal is formed into working paper NGO WP.7. Under our proposal, the legal instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons is placed in a framework agreement on nuclear disarmament as a protocol. The main body of this framework agreement sets out legal obligations for the total elimination of nuclear weapons to which the nuclear-armed and nuclear-reliant states are already committed politically. Also, there could be protocols on positive obligations, transparency and risk reduction measures, or possibly on elimination backed by verification. Each of the protocols, as well as the main body, shall set up their own individual conference of the parties. As for entry into force, different protocols can have different conditions. Our point is that all these arrangements hopefully would enhance the involvement of states that are currently not ready to join provisions to prohibit nuclear weapons, while ensuring that the ban comes into effect at an early date. Madam President, I am aware that the above-mentioned idea of the entire framework agreement does not exactly fit into the scope of this conference, and I appreciate your generosity in giving me a chance to explain about it, despite that fact. My hope is that any of its elements or the underlying ideas in our proposal would offer hints in some way or other in framing the institutional parts of the future Prohibition Treaty. I am confident that this conference will create a strong and effective legal instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons, leading towards their total elimination. And I believe that its strength and effectiveness depend highly upon whether this conference can work out institutional arrangements to enable the involvement of as many states as possible. I thank you, Madam President.
Le agradezco.
I thank Ms. Arai of Peace Depot for her contribution. I now give the floor to Mr. Alinsan